So I have to say, it's a pleasure to be back here on a cold day like this. This is my favorite part of the year. The colder it gets, the better. I was at Brown in 1978 when we had the big blizzard, and Brown shut for 7 days for the first time since 1764. So, hey, bring it on, right? Competitive strategy for Ocean State, Brookings 1.0. Again, just to build on what Stefan said, it had a particular thesis about how city-states grow prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable economies. It looked at advanced industries. There are only 8 to 10% of the jobs in the United States, about 50 industry clusters, manufacturing, services, and energy. But they're about 60% of our exports, it's about 80% of our engineers, about 90% of R&D. So off of a small base, basically states are able to build this multiplier effect, which reverberates for everyone else. Without advanced industries, I won't name check a particular country in Europe or elsewhere, but this is the gift that keeps on giving. And what we basically are going to put forward, though the wording may change depending on public comment and back and forth, are 3 main findings with a bunch of concrete and tangible recommendations. The first, and this is always hard to do in the United States, particularly at a period like this, you have made a lot of progress, and particularly given the fall that you had, not just after the recession, but really in the early part of the century when manufacturing took a heavy hit. So there has been an enormous amount of progress. That progress has been helped along by a very unusual, purposeful, intentional alignment of programs and policies that were enacted post-2016. A focus on strengthening networks and ecosystems. For the most part, we don't tend to focus on this in the U.S., but that interrelationship between universities, mature companies, startups, scale-ups, investors, labor training, education more broadly, placemaking, transportation. You've aligned a lot of things there, which have contributed, as we'll show as we've looked at all these programs, to this growth. Most states we go in, I've done many reports in the United States, you put out a report, you call for all these things, 2 years later you check back, they got diverted, they got distracted, they did something else, right? The idea virus at the moment. You've stayed on track here, and we've sat with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different groups. There was no script, and people talked about their alignment with these advanced industries. Very important. Last bit, there are challenges here, big challenges. Some of them are structural in the American economy in terms of growth of low-wage jobs that we need to deal with. Others are specific to this state in terms of housing policy, a lack of available sites for industrial expansion, and talent competition. When you get to unemployment at this level, there's hyper competition, right? So those are going to be the big findings, and I'm going to walk through a bit of this. So first, you're on the mend. Just to go back, you got hit. You got hit really, really hard in this state from 2000 to 08, and then we all took a collapse in a housing-led recession. So you came into it, you were like the last one out of it. So when we came into 2015, 2016, there was still a failure to basically get back on track with these advanced industries. We had done a report at Brookings when McKinsey, who identified these 50 advanced industry clusters. We did an enormous amount of analysis here. We basically said that at the end, you've got 5, right? Biomed, not surprisingly. Defense, shipbuilding, and maritime. You are the ocean state. Good, right? Blue tech, rising part of the advanced industry cluster. Design, food, and custom manufacturing. Advanced business services, and IT and cybersecurity. So we went through these 5. And anytime you do this, you need to recognize that these are not verticals. There's a lot of convergence across all these industry sectors. If you want to see one of the most technologically enabled sector, go hang out with the maritime industry, the shipbuilding industry, navigation, deal with the fisheries, obviously the military, what's going on with the Navy, not just the production side, but what's going on with the Smart Bay and Narragansett. So these are not separate verticals. They tend to interplay with each other. But that's who you are. Everyone says we want to be the next Silicon Valley. Good luck, right? No, I mean, there are legacy industries that have to be sort of nurtured. So what we're doing this time around is basically looking at the policies and programs that were enacted, what progress has been made, how can you improve them, and then look at what we did look at the last time, these other threats and potential opportunities. So as Stefan said, this is not a great number, 11.2% unemployment in 2010. Again, you just got slammed by the recession. Took a while to pick up speed, 4.1% in 2018, you're down now 3.6%. Looks different for African Americans, about 6.5%. It's different for Latinos, about 7.5%. But you're more in line now, right, with the rest of the country. This is very, very good news because you couldn't predict this unless you had made some progress on the core. We looked at your growth, total growth in Rhode Island jobs, 7%. But when we look at these advanced industries, and we look at some of these other opportunity clusters that we identified back in 2015, 2016, you're at 12% growth. So you're growing faster in these priority clusters than the economy as a whole. Again, good news, right? And it's very hard in the U.S. to ever talk about good news, but you know, you have to sort of celebrate it when you have it. There has been a long-standing decline of output per worker in this state. A part of that was just because manufacturing collapsed and other advanced industries were really not performing. So that's been stopped, right? I mean, you're basically have leveling off, you know, this critical economic measure. Good. You would rather obviously be having it move up, but you know, to some extent, a lot of the policies that have been put in place and the other investments by non-government actors, you know, this is not just about the government. I mean, you've got to look at your private sector, you've got to look at your universities, you've got to look at the civic sector. And obviously what's been going on in some of these non-public sectors are just beginning to pay off, right? I mean, Brown has seen an enormous growth, obviously, in NIH grants, right? I mean, this is, you know, as it's been described to us, you know, before, Brown was like the Swarthmore in Providence for a long time. Great liberal arts school, but not with heavy R&D or graduate programs and no real commercialization of companies. Brown is in a different place today because of what's happened in the past decade. URI, obviously, has had real chops in oceanography and engineering. That's paying off. RISD, et cetera, et cetera. And these are just some of the schools. So we're seeing a leveling off. Good news. Not surprisingly, the real growth, and this is a structural issue in the U.S. And we're not Germany, right? We're not Germany. We're not a country with 20% in advanced industries. That was a policy choice made at the macro level, at the federal level, really. So the bulk of the growth, the real growth, is in non-advanced industries. This is a structural issue in the U.S. where these industries do not pay sufficient wages or have sufficient benefits. You got about 300,000 people, we were talking to the head of your Human Services Department today, qualify for Medicaid. You got 90,000 people with food stamps. I mean, these are people working, right? Many of them are working, and they're not getting paid sufficient to make the ends meet. So that's not a Rhode Island problem, that's an American problem. But your advanced industries are beginning to provide a stronger platform for growth going forward. And then, of course, something that we didn't really predict, it was talked about back in 2015. You're first in the water with offshore wind. It's emblematic of a shift to a clean, green, blue economy. It doesn't mean, as we'll talk about later, that you're going to control the whole supply chain for offshore wind, because this is going to be a growing industry. but it does mean you have a shot at certain segments of the supply chain, probably particularly around operations and maintenance. And there may be other companies that are in the middle part of the United States. So this is not just about getting the Germans and the Danes and the Dutch to get over here, which is not a bad thing, but there are other companies in the middle part of the US that do onshore wind that might get attracted here. So this is really important because, you know, with next generation technology, particularly those that have a production element and a big maintenance element, you want to be early in. Right? You want to be a first mover, and then you want to control. Section 2, a lot of policies have been enacted here, right, since 2016, 2015. Workforce development and talent, labor supply, wage maker, real jobs. What's going on with your community colleges, which is really quite remarkable. What's going on in the high schools with career and technical education. This was a state, like many states, if you looked at career and technical education in 2014, cosmetology, right? Like that was the big program to take. Things have changed here dramatically in a very short period of time. Tax and regulatory reforms, a bunch of smart, strategic, targeted tax reductions, the rulemaking streamlining, which I'll talk about, very significant. Business attraction, worker support, probably not as much focus on site readiness, though proposals have been put forward, but some really important tax incentives. Quality of place, I think it's a gorgeous state, but a portion of its cores have been hollowed out. As you begin to think about rail expansion, right, that could be reversed. Innovation campuses, innovation is an interesting area to focus on because more and more what we're seeing is a density like 195 or some of these other innovation campuses. You know, we used to think about innovation in the Silicon Valley, well, just distributed, just dispersed, Steve Jobs in a garage. It's more of a collective intelligence, collaborative intelligence exercise. So we're seeing these campuses take hold. And then a new focus on really networks, intermediaries. I mean, the Providence Chamber, thanks to Lori for hosting us, I mean, this is, the chambers itself are like platforms and networks. But more and more these clusters have particular intermediaries, and then obviously the focus on Cambridge Innovation Center, Innovation Newport, new kinds of co-working. A lot of stuff was enacted. So the method of going through all this is to go into each of the major programs and then just to do, you know, the math. To what extent did these programs allocate resources to advance industry clusters so that you have some density effect? When you look at real jobs, obviously, you know, marine trades, manufacturing, health and life sciences, there's some real focus here because it's company demand for jobs that exist. I mean, this is not some mythical job, right? This is not train and pray. This is train and place. So there's an enormous amount of effort going on in colleges right now and with other aligned training programs with a whole bunch of very different firms, whether it's the manufacturing firms or whether it's advanced services firms. This is good news. I mean, you know, Rhode Island should be talking about a radical shift in workforce development. Going below that, you know, so innovation vouchers, very clever policy to give companies that have technological problems on the product side or on the process side, $50,000, go to URI, go to Brown, go to RISD, go to a whole bunch of different places, and get the faculty support or the graduate student support to help solve the problem. This is what basically Northern Europe has been doing for a long, long time with their applied research universities. You're now doing it in the state, and there's a whole bunch of companies that have been supported with innovation vouchers. What that's doing, obviously, is helping them solve some product technology problems. It's strengthening the connection between your universities, your companies, many of whom are small, right? So they don't have the ability to do this just by themselves. That then has a job effect, investment effect, et cetera, et cetera. these new intermediaries are really interesting because when we were back in the state with Brookings in 2015, 2016, Cambridge Innovation Center was not here, Innovate Newport was not here. A bunch of these other intermediaries were very young. I mean, it was early days, right? And now what you're seeing is they are the connective tissue between all of these different parts of the ecosystem. And when you think about how economies grow, it's not just because about program X or policy Y. It's because companies, particularly small and medium-sized companies, are connecting to each other, right? About skills training, around investment, around growth and expansion. So these intermediaries are basically providing a platform. If you actually look at the bio system, you have a real play in bio, by the way. It's not bio writ large. It's not everything, right? You're not going to be Mission Bay in San Francisco. You're not going to be the Texas Medical Center in Houston. You're not going to be Philly or Cleveland. But you've got niche plays here, particularly around neurotech, brain-computer interface, around parts of the oncology, cancer, et cetera. You can see that when you begin to invest in this infrastructure, there's like almost a hockey puck effect. You've got a bit of activity at the beginning, and I can put up design, same kind of, did anyone go to design week here a couple of weeks ago? I mean, it's sort of it begins to get more sort of volume of activity, not just, sort of gatherings, but company startups, company formation, company expansion, jobs, right? So this is happening. Again, it's hard at times to talk about because we don't tend to focus on ecosystems. We tend to focus in the U.S. on unicorns. But if anyone's seen the WeWork IPO, I'm not sure that was the best thing to do. And then supply RI, right? You've got major employers here, including the universities. And the question is, where are they doing their purchasing? Is there a connection between locally owned business and where a whole bunch of these companies are buying food or buying other services or other goods? This is an ecosystem that is getting built here. It doesn't get built overnight. There wasn't really a culture about it, but it's getting built now. And so this is, again, a sign of movement. And finally, on the business platform, when we came in the last time around in 2015, literally everyone said, this is a horrible place to do business. Horrible. And then they would give us a whole bunch of anecdotes about how terrible it was. Fine, we're Americans, we like to complain. So the bottom line is there has been a lot of change here. Not, never over. And what's very interesting about rules, put taxes aside, but regulations, is more and more what you're seeing in the mature economies, or these regulatory sandboxes, where businesses, universities, NGOs, government can work together to streamline. Very interesting stuff. You're spending an enormous amount of time on this. And again, because you're small, you can get your arms around this. Okay, where do you go from here? This is still early, right? I mean, this is due December 17th. What I learned at Brown was like, go right up to the day that the test is here. I learned a lot of bad habits. Because we had the new curriculum, right? So, we weren't getting grades anyway. So.
And then pray for 78.
What that?
And then pray for 78.
Oh no, you always prayed for the blizzard. And then you go, good, I'm out of that exam. So these are early. The first, is not going to be surprising to folks in the room. We weren't kidding about advanced industries. So you've stopped the hemorrhaging, you're starting to crawl back. You have a real play here in certain advanced industries. You're the ocean state. You have a play in the blue economy across multiple dimensions because of NUIC, because of advanced naval investments, right? Which include the Smart Bay in Narragansett, because of offshore wind. These are heavy technology-driven blue economy plays, right? And you're the ocean state. It's real. This is an obvious, authentic thing to do. You've got certain plays in bio that are very real. We think technology, because it cuts across all the advanced industries, could be a particular focus for the state. So you don't have to be everything. You can really be the best 21st century version of yourself, is really what it comes down to. So we're going to have a series of recommendations about how you build on this. And because so many things were put in place, it's not, some of these are going to seem like small tweaks. Like, for example, the innovation vouchers basically said to a company, if you have a technology problem, go find someone in the university who can help you. There may be tweaks here where some companies can do that in-house, or if you think about, for example, the evolution of the 195 district, they could be reaching out to small design firms, right, architecture firms, etc., and bringing them in to sort of improve the quality of place in the district. So, bottom line, don't be like another state and say, okay, we did that for 3 years, that was fun. We're now on to the next thing. It's like ADD policy, right? You got to keep doing this. To turn around a state that has had such a dramatic effect on its advanced industry, this is a decade-long renewal job. So you've got to keep going. There'll be a series of recommendations around that. Blue economy, I talked about. Offshore wind, we think operations and maintenance could be a play, and we think there might be a play with some of these partner companies that might want to, these are wind companies that might want to have a position on the coasts. Again, it's not just about the Europeans. On small manufacturers, bottom line, you got about 1,600 small manufacturers in the state, about 40,000 jobs. These folks are under enormous technological advancement pressure. Think about additive manufacturing, what it'll do to metals. Think about what's going on with the composites. These are small companies. Some of them have owners who are basically trying to think about, well, I'm not doing this, my kids don't want to do it, so how do I think about succession plan? They need support, right? So we'll have a whole bunch of recommendations on that. Real jobs, innovation vouchers, innovation campus. For any policy people in the room, you'll enjoy this. Bottom line, this multi-sector approach really needs to connect, and so, or to expand. And so we think supply RI is early. It can clearly be broadened. And I think that would naturally happen. But when we look at other efforts to expand purchasing and vending from existing, frankly, you don't have enough people doing this. 2 or 3 more FTEs would be expansive. Anchors. Anchors play multiple roles in the U.S. economy, more so than in other places. They hire, if you hire local, if you buy local, if you invest local, can have this multiplier effect. So we'll be sort of sorting through a bunch of that. And then finally, on Invest RI, there's this mythology that all the wealth in the United States, on the private side, not on the public side, on the private side, lives in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York. I mean, frankly, because of pensions, university endowments, high net worth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's enormous wealth in the U.S. that tends to be exported from communities because that capital goes to hedge funds, private equity firms, venture capital firms, and wealth management companies, and then it gets sent to the alpha cities. So we're trying to sort through how more of the local capital can stay local. That'll be part of this. There's actually another piece that we're working on, which is really the challenges that people have put forward to us. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't really look at the first time around. Housing, the effect that, frankly, local land use policy has had on constricting housing supply, particularly for families with kids. That's a serious issue here. Serious issue that really needs to be addressed. Talent, we talked about. Site readiness clearly has to be put on the list. And then your demographic transition. Like most of the entire country, you will be a majority minority state in a relatively short period of time. The question is whether you can upgrade the skills of Black and Brown Rhode Islanders, but also expand the size and the scale of businesses owned by people of color. That's only going to happen with purposeful activity, policy. We're going to talk about what Cincinnati has been doing over the past 15 or 20 years with a very successful minority business accelerator. We think that could be brought into Rhode Island, and not separate and apart from everything I've talked about, but be fundamentally related to advanced industry, supply RI. So within a very short period of time, you start seeing a 2x, 5x effect on this very significant issue of racial and ethnic disparities on income, health, and wealth. So that's where we are today.